food is the number one driver of the microbiome. No matter how many studies we do, it just turns out that getting the right nutrients is the thing that's going to positively influence that microbiome. So food really is medicine, especially when it comes to the gut. And I think the reason that some people get a little hesitant around that is because people are like, well, what does that mean? It's so overwhelming. Eat better. You're like, okay, great. I would love to. How do I do that?
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the show. I am so happy you're here. Today, we are diving into the microbiome with Dr. Taylor Soderberg. Taylor is a licensed physician, and she has a PhD in integrative physiology. She is also a microbiome specialist and consultant. I've been wanting to have someone on the show for quite some time to talk about the microbiome, but it wasn't until I came across a note from Taylor on Substack about perfectionism and health, which I'll get to in just a minute, that I knew I found my person. And I'm so glad I did. I think you're going to love this conversation. We dive into what the microbiome is and where the science is at, because this is a fairly new field of study, but it is certainly growing really fast. Taylor describes the role of the microbiome in our health and in our immune function. We talk about the microbiome and longevity, or as she puts it, our health span instead of our lifespan, which I love, as well as the link between the microbiome and food allergies and food sensitivities. It's probably not a surprise to hear that food is the number one driver of microbiome health in adults, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Taylor offers great tips for supporting our microbiome through food. And we also get into the role of supplements, talking about probiotics and prebiotics. Finally, we talk about the myth of perfectionism when it comes to our health. So often we think that we have to achieve perfect health, but I just want to remind you guys that that is a total myth. We are ever-changing organisms, and so I like to switch that from trying to control our health to being in relationship with our health. And Taylor offers a great tip for navigating all of this information about health that we are bombarded with in order to find the one thing that works for our unique lifestyles. I hope that you guys love the show. If you find it inspiring or moving, please support it by liking it over on Substack. You can rate it on your podcast app, and you can become a subscriber to the Mind, Body, Spirit, Food newsletter, where I dive into these topics. I share weekly brand new recipes, and I explore how we can find more presence, ease, and joy in the cooking and eating process. If you become a paid subscriber, love you all. You make all of this work possible. This truly couldn't happen without paid support. This is an ad-free podcast. And just a few dollars a month goes a really long way. As a paid subscriber, you'll have access to the full recipe archive, over 100 recipes in there at this point. You get free cooking classes and a whole bunch of other fun perks. So I hope that you'll consider that. I'll include a link in the show notes to do that. And without further ado, let's hop into the show. Taylor, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to talk to you about the microbiome today.
Yes, me too, Nikki. I'm so excited for this conversation.
So I'm going to start by asking you the first question that I ask all of my guests, and that is, what is your cultural upbringing and how has that influenced your relationship to food?
Yeah, I love this question, and it definitely gave me pause. It's like, what is my culture? What was my upbringing? I mean, I think my culture was single mom, 2 girls, just us gals growing up and surviving, I think is really what our culture was growing up. I was raised by an incredible mom who did become a single parent. And so I always felt so cared for and never had any concerns. But as I've gotten older, I realized a bit more. I think she struggled quite a bit to provide for us. And I mean, my mom is a hustler. And so she did everything to give us the best upbringing. But I grew up in a household where family meals, food was not really a big focus. We didn't often sit down and all have a meal with multi-parts together. You know, some of my fondest memories growing up, realizing that we had cut cheese and microwaved it on crackers. And then we were like, I think we just had dinner because we love cheese and crackers in my family. And those were moments that I really, think of fondly growing up. But food was just never a big part of our upbringing. We, opened the fridge. There was not snacks. There was, a little bit of like a barren, I'm hungry, but we didn't focus on food a lot growing up. And so I think that's something as I've gotten into my specialty, which is microbiome and how important food is for that. It's definitely made me realize I just didn't have a relationship with food, really. So it's been fun to explore that.
First of all, I just want to emphasize that I love that so much that those special memories can be microwaving cheese on crackers. It doesn't have to be this gourmet experience all the time. As I just feel curious about this, do you like to cook these days, or does food play a role, or is it still, because I do think for some people, food is fuel, and for other people, food is entertainment. And, there's a whole bunch of ways that we think about food, but what is your relationship with it now? Just curious.
It's something I think about a lot because of the health benefits around it, but it's not something that I don't spend a lot of time cooking. Every once in a while, I'll do a lot of meal prepping, and I do enjoy it, but it's not something I prioritize. So it's definitely not, I don't have a deep relationship with the preparation of food, particularly for myself, but I love everything that food brings, which is health and community. But when it comes to just preparing food for me, I'm like, all right, let's just get this task done.
Yeah, I hear that. So, how did you become interested in the microbiome? I found you because of something you wrote about on Substack, which I'll share later, but I don't know much about your background, and I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Could you just share, how did you get here and why?
So I got interested in the microbiome. I knew from pretty young age that I love science. I loved medicine. I wanted to go into that area of study. So after I graduated from college, before just jumping straight into what was going to be lifelong academia, or so I thought, I decided to become a teacher for a few years through Teach for America, so I could just get outside of my own life bubble, see how other people live, other places growing up. And so I was a middle school teacher for 2 years. And during that time, I became fascinated with how the environment we grow up in, the food that we're exposed to, notably school lunches. There's a whole different conversation about school lunches we could have. And I got very interested in these environmental factors on lifelong health. And so through that, when I did do my MD PhD, I found myself constantly drawn towards that question. And so I found a lab that was doing research in that area and this kind of newer concept, the microbiome. And so I was like, oh, this is a target that we can very easily study. The samples are endless when we're talking about gut microbiome because it's poop. And we had the technology to start studying it at a, fairly affordable price. The technology kind of come along at that point. So I was like, this is great. Not only is it easy to study, easy to collect, it's also something we can actually create interventions on for this generation, for people now, not discovering something that takes, decades, generational changes. So I was really excited about this very targetable, intervenable system that we just didn't know a lot about. So that's how I became very fascinated in the microbiome initially.
Okay, so the microbiome, that word, I think we all have a general sense of what that means. It's definitely gained traction, but it is still a new field. So can you take us back a little bit and just describe what is the microbiome and where is the science at this point?
Yeah. And what I love about this question is Hippocrates was the first one to say that the origin of all disease is in the gut. That was a very, very, very long time ago.
Right.
And then only in the past couple decades have we actually started to research the gut microbiome. So we've known that the gut is a huge, huge part of our wellness. But I think maybe it took us a little while to accept the fact that we live with trillions of microbes inside us.
Wow.
And 48 trillion is the estimate for our gut microbiome. And so this is really the hottest area of research because people find it's easy to study, it's intervenable, it's applicable to all aspects of our health. And so I would say microbiome research generally is sort of in its infancy. Gut microbiome is definitely the most well understood. But a lot of people don't realize when we talk about the microbiome, they're pretty much referring to the gut, but we have microbiomes all over our entire bodies, the entire world, the soil has a microbiome. We're actually learning that the soil, the microbiome of the soil is in trouble. It's interfering with the nutrient properties of our food. So we're just learning how much we coexist with bacteria. And so gut is the most well-studied. We have respiratory microbiome, we have vaginal microbiome, we have oral microbiome, skin microbiome, and we're learning that all of these play a role in health. And where are we at in the status of the research? We're getting better at characterizing what normal is and what not normal is. It sort of depends on like the system we're talking about. Gut brain, we are understanding the pathways, but we don't fully understand the relationship between microbiome and different conditions. When it comes to inflammatory conditions like eczema, asthma, we understand a lot more about those pathways.
Interesting. Ooh, there's like so much here. Okay, so from what you know and what science knows, how does the microbiome impact our current state of health, but then also our future states of health? Because I know you wrote recently about longevity and the microbiome.
My
so interesting.
current obsession is longevity in the microbiome. Longevity, I think, is a just general obsession in the health field right now. And I think people are realizing that, one, especially in the US, we are not living near as long as we probably could be, which is shocking because we have so many developments in this country. And so it's really come up on people's radars. And we're realizing it's also not just about living longer, it's about living healthier longer. So health span, not lifespan. So, okay, what do we know about the microbiome in our health? So there's really like a couple different phases of your life, and it's all about the microbiome's relationship with your immune system. Very early on in life, your microbiome is teaching your immune system how to behave. And so in those first 1,000 days, which is kind of a catchphrase in early life research, that's when your microbiome is either teaching your immune system to behave properly, play nicely with friends, not respond to good things, take care of the bad things. Or if it doesn't learn that well, it's going to be overreactive, chronic inflammation. That's initial sort of setting the dial on where your immune system's at. Is it turned way up, reactive, or is it at a good lower set point? A lot of your adult life, your microbiome is sort of interfacing with that immune system and sort of wiggling from the base point. It can still mount a response if you have a really inflammatory microbiome. Even if you have the best trained immune system, it's still going to be triggered and inflammatory. If you have a very sensitive, reactive immune system, mild inflammation in your microbiome could really sort of send you a little bit over the edge in a way that someone else wouldn't be as reactive. So adult life, it's all about maintaining that lower inflammation, not having chronic low levels of inflammation, which can compound into problems later, and just really making sure you're getting like nutrition from your food, optimizing your health for later on, where the newest research is seeing that we can actually look at a microbiome and predict 4-year mortality if you're over 80. So sorry, everyone, you can't do that now, but they found in people who are over 80, there's a really strong ability to look at microbiome health and determine the likelihood that someone's going to live for 4 more years. So we're realizing that there's a lot of that later life immune system. Your immune system gets a little bit weaker as you get older, but you still have to be able to respond to things, but again, not have chronic inflammation. So it's all about the microbiome's interface with our immune system. What your immune system should be doing at various phases of life.
What are researchers looking for when they see a healthy microbiome? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Again, that depends on age. And so I'll kind of focus on like the adult phase of life because it's very different if you're a baby. We're learning it's a little bit different if you're in sort of 80 plus, getting more of that centenarian phase of life. So for general adults, diversity is going to be your number one thing that you want to focus on, is having a wide diversity. Turns out diversity is great in every aspect of every facet of life.
Amen.
Your microbiome, and high diversity is associated with better health, which sneak peek, really related to your diet.
Yeah.
But we're learning it's also not just about who's in the microbiome, but as technology is getting better, we can actually see the function of those microbes. And we're realizing that 2 people could have kind of a different collection of microbes, but if they're taking care of the same function, that's actually going to be more important. So there's something called butyrate, which people may or may not be familiar with. It's a little bit of like a buzzword when it comes to some health supplements. And butyrate is something our microbes make. And it turns out it's really good at interacting with the rest of our body, maintaining our gut health, anti-inflammatory, even our bone health, brain health. It does so much. And so it actually might matter more like, are you making enough butyrate versus you have the right amount of this specific bacteria?
Interesting. This is a question that came up. I recently did a solo podcast and I had a lot of questions about food sensitivities. And I know I have food sensitivities. My kids do as well.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious if the microbiome plays a part in that. It feels like that infant stage might influence where we are,
Yes.
why.
It really does. And this is one of the areas where the research is pretty strong, mostly for, not to get like too technical, but like IgE mediated food allergies, which is really what we think of when people carry around EpiPens, have like potential anaphylactic response to very severe allergies. There's a lot of research on the early life microbiome and the risk of developing those. And a little less research, but some pretty clear trends around like more just food sensitivities where like we really don't tolerate them well. We clearly have a reaction, but it's not that massive life-threatening reaction.
Right.
And one of my life missions is that babies early in life start having microbiome testing to make sure they're on track. That microbiome set well before we start seeing problems. When we start seeing immune reactivity, that probably means some misprogramming has already started. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't still like jump in and try to correct the microbiome imbalances as soon as possible. Again, it compounds over life, but really those first 1,000 days is a really critical time. And I mean, even as early as 2 weeks of life, especially depending on like how you're born, how you're being fed, what sort of exposures you have, life happens, but that can sort of influence the risk of developing those things. And so I think it's really important early on to make sure that you have that nice appropriate immune training microbiome.
Interesting. So let's get into how we support our microbiome through food, through supplements. What are the ways to support all of these beautiful bacteria that we coexist with?
Yes. So unsurprisingly, perhaps food is the number one driver of the microbiome. No matter how many studies we do, it just turns out that getting the right nutrients is the thing that's going to positively influence that microbiome. So food really is medicine, especially when it comes to the gut. And I think the reason that some people get a little hesitant around that is because people are like, well, what does that mean? It's so overwhelming. Eat better. You're like, okay, great. I would love to. How do I do that? And so it's really about that diversity. And you can also use, if you have access to gut microbiome testing, you can actually see what sort of areas your microbiome might specifically be deficient in. So the ability to digest different types of fibers, we can now see, is your microbiome good at digesting cellulose? Is it good at digesting galacto-oligosaccharides? What is your protein digestion looking like in your microbiome? If that's not something your microbiome is really supposed to be doing a ton of and can lead to some more toxic metabolites being made. And so we actually have the ability now to do testing to get that level of data, which can really help simplify the areas to focus on for your gut. And then if you can't do gut testing, which is, a reality and totally fine, there's different like understanding of what types of fibers and what types of food promote what type of bacteria, especially those butyrate producers, and focusing on those things can be really helpful for implementing those changes without that individualized data. So food is really such a key driver, and it's just about diversity, 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 and diversity of your foods.
So that's just meaning like a whole different range of fruits, vegetables, proteins, all the things.
Yeah, rainbow. Aiming for, so there's sort of two really concrete pieces of advice. And again, this is the sort of thing like doing this every week all the time is just probably not a reality for most of us.
Sure.
So every couple of months or so, I like to do a check-in where I track my unique plant intake for the week. And I also try to see how many different colors of the rainbow I'm getting each day. And so you can get like a rainbow food chart. They're pretty readily available on the internet. You can make your own, and you just aim for one food from each color of the rainbow each day, and then aiming for 30 total unique different plants. And it's not about like, I have to do that or I'm terrible. It's like checking in and like, what is my sort of natural baseline that I settle at? The first time I did it, I found I was settling at about like 22 to 24 unique plants a week. So I was like, I'm pretty close, but I think I can up that to meet that 30. And so that's just a really good way to check in. Also, don't feel ashamed if you find you're like, what is a plant? I was like, that is the most basic question. The first time I did it, I was like looking at a thing with carboncle beans, and I was like, are you a plant? Is a plant? But all of a sudden you're like, I don't know what constitutes a plant.
Yeah, sure.
I was eating the garnishes. Like if I went out to dinner or I got a cocktail, I'd be like, we're eating all the garnishes because that's a unique plant. And my friends were a little embarrassed to be out with me during that time.
So yeah, because when you expand it and you think about the amount of plants, they are. I mean, all fruits, all vegetables, legumes, beans, grains. Are we talking grains? So that's a big swath of stuff, actually. So 30 does sound overwhelming. Like, oh my God, I got to eat the rainbow. And I really like how you said, this is not every day. This is maybe not every week. We all have times, we all have periods where like life is hectic. And, you know, just overall to keep that as a general focus, not focus, or a goal, but not goal. Like these words can sometimes feel heavy, but it's not about perfection. It's about just knowing that the more diversity we get, the more we're supporting the diversity in our guts.
Exactly. And that's where there's a beautiful role for supplements along with it. I do think,
I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah. Food first. Food should be a focus. That's going to maintain all the good things that are happening. But if you're missing a key bacterium, you can't feed it if it's not there. And so having the right probiotics, again, having the data is the most helpful way to know which of these many, many different products you can choose. But even without the data, you can kind of look at ways that you can really assess different companies and do they have research? What are their main goals? What are they saying the outcome of this is to figure out if it's the right type of species or strains in their product for the goals that you individually have. And so, yeah, there's really good quality supplements out there when it comes to probiotics. Prebiotics, too. There's really good products out there that can provide a lot of the micronutrients that most of us are missing, even with a great diet. Magnesium. Most of us do not get enough magnesium. And my belief is it's totally okay to take a high quality supplement to help with achieving those goals, especially if it's not an excuse to not focus on having a good diet as well. So I think supplements are really great for filling in gaps that are hard to meet and for jumpstarting changes when they need a little boost to get started and then supported by food.
I have a question for people who can't, where testing for their microbiome isn't an option. And I feel like then you start kind of like experimenting with different probiotics. This maybe is an obvious question, but like, are there bodily cues to know that this is like serving me well or this is not? And I think maybe like you just got to feel into that, but maybe there are some more tangible cues. Are there?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's about how it makes you feel. And that's very subjective, but that's the whole reason we do this is to feel better. And so I think, maybe noticing your bowel movements, I think is obviously like going to be a really good key indicator of, frequency. That's a whole huge topic, especially in children, like what is normal, what's not normal. But I think if you notice there's a little bit more regularity, ease, comfort with bowel movements, that's a sign of really good gut health. That's a great indicator of getting enough fiber. And then I think it's also just figuring out like what are the main areas that an individual specifically struggles with a bit. So if sleep is something that's kind of a challenge, looking for magnesium is going to be like, are you missing magnesium in your diet? That's a common source of a lot of just feeling a little sluggish, not sleeping well for people. And so I do think that if you're able to work with a provider who can kind of help figure out based on, like, just take that level away of trying to figure out, this is the main concern that I have, what would be good for me to focus on. So a lot of people who are very well educated out there on those things and can kind of help figure out where you should focus. And then from there, you can focus on that. The internet is amazing and there's so much great research out there. It's just kind of about like reality of time, the economy of time and how much time you have to put into it. But I think you can really go based on like symptoms. Otherwise, if you're just trying to promote good health, I would say it's just about finding something that's providing general micronutrients, diversity, and just seeing how it makes you feel.
So the reason I reached out to you to be on the podcast is because you had a note in Substack, and I'm going to read it because I loved this so much, and it's rare to hear somebody in the medical field speak like this. But you said, one thing I've noticed with a lot of health content is that it often sparks feelings of inadequacy. I find myself thinking, I'm not doing enough. I'm left unmotivated by this overwhelm of perfection. And my readers, my listeners know that I talk a lot about this myth of perfectionism in the kitchen, which is driven by societal factors, by social media for sure, and how it stifles us. But so, yeah, we can get into this loop of perfectionism with cooking, with food, but also with our bodies. And I do think there's this, especially I feel like rising right now, this myth of perfectionism around health. Like I am going to achieve perfect health, but we are living organisms that are constantly changing. So to me, it's about being in relationship with that and not trying to achieve it or anything. But I just wanted to hear your thoughts about this and how we can escape or maybe just turn the lens on this notion of perfectionism and perfect health.
Yeah. I'm so glad we're talking about this. And I loved your way of describing it, that it's not something that we're achieving, it's something that we're doing. I think that is such a good way to think about this. Yeah. So I think, especially being in this era where we have so much data, it's a lot of health, especially in the sort of what we call the direct-to-consumer world, which is where people are making health tools accessible to people outside of the route of going to your physician or having to utilize insurance, which is wonderful. I love empowering people with data. And it means that data has been accessible to people about their health, their bodies in ways that it never has been before. And that should feel overwhelming. Like that's totally fine for that to feel overwhelming. And so I think one, there's an issue of this sense of overwhelm. I could be doing all these things and I do have all this data. And then also we have to remember that we live in a capitalistic society. Not to get too much on my soapbox, but you have to remember when you're taking in health content, a lot of time people are trying to get you to do something. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing to get you to do. There's a lot of really cool stuff out there that can really deeply impact your health. But to do that and to win that competition for your attention, fear is used a lot. And that can lead to the sense of not only am I not being perfect, I'm not doing enough, but that also means that if I'm not doing it, I'm actively harming myself. And that's part of the tools that are used to get people to take these actions. And a big thing I think about is how do we encourage people to do stuff without you turning to that sense of fear? And it's really hard. And so I've been thinking a lot about like health these days it's not even preventative, it's defensive at this point. So many toxic things in our world. So in a way, I'm like, yeah, we should be a little scared. We should be motivated to do things for our health so we can live longer, better, healthier. But we also can't live in a state of fear because we know stress is really bad for us. So it's really hard for us to communicate about health these days without that fear. And how much fear is motivating versus how much fear is demotivating. And so I think those are just helpful things to remember. And then for me, I think a lot about like, what's one thing that I can focus on, like do one thing well. I guess I'll give an example. I started a couple months ago going for a walk every morning, no matter what. I heard it in this book. It was like 100 ways to change your life. And I was like, that's a lot of ways. I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And then the one thing I stuck with was taking a morning walk. And now it's just second nature. I don't even think about it. And now that that's second nature, I feel ready to maybe layer on a new health practice that will be beneficial for me. And so I think doing one thing well allows it to become part of your routine. And then you can start layering on different actions. So I think that's one thing that I really have tried to take to heart. And then the other thing is just choosing one system or sort of one way that you want to focus on your health. If you want to get really into food and cooking and that aspect of it, that's great. And then maybe like don't think about the rest of the different things that you could be doing that you're hearing about. Be like, that's cool. And then just keep on your merry way. For me, gut microbiome. That is my focus. That is what I love. Me and Hippocrates, totally in agreement. Origin of most health and disease does start in the gut. So that is a thing that if people are looking for a thing to focus on, I'm all about microbiome. And so for me, that's sort of my one focus area that would be really important for me. And I encourage other people to focus on it. But somebody want to choose a different system, maybe yoga practices or introducing meditation or yoga, exercise. That's also super awesome. But I just kind of recommend like choosing one to focus on and build those habits and become like the biggest fan of that approach.
I love that so much because like you said, this can be so overwhelming. And it's like, no, I just have to do one thing. And let's like add the joy as part of that. Like do the one thing that you feel passionate or joyful about, because then you will stick with it. Like I'm sure the reason you stuck with walking is because it really satisfied you in some way. And then it becomes automated and then you can, layer on from there. But just to start with one thing seems so much more doable than to feel overwhelmed. And then sometimes in that state of overwhelm, at least for me, I do nothing because I'm just in like, I don't know, I feel like totally stuck. So, but one thing, choose one thing. I love that. That's a great tip.
And I think also like, sometimes I think there's a fear around sharing what you're doing or I'm working on my health in this way, because then if you're not perfect at it, a lot of social media use, which again, is great. There's so many good things about that. Building community. We met through Substack. It's incredible. And we're noticing more and more that authenticity resonates with people. So there's like one of my favorite tweets I've ever seen was something about like, I went to the gym and exercised for 45 minutes and then I drank 4 cups of coffee and ate a whole box of crackers. And it's like, walk the line between like wellness and unwellness is a fine one. And I'm walking it hard, but it's like, just being honest about like, I do a lot of these like good things. And then sometimes I'm human and I do things that are less healthy for myself. Or sure, I made a really good meal, but it looks so ugly. Like, I think there's a lot of humor that we can find in that and connects us to other people. I think that that's the other tactic besides fear is authenticity. So here's a great tactic to motivate people, to get them to, like and subscribe and follow and do the things that you want them to do. And then being relatable and real is another great way to engage with community. And so I don't want to vilify anybody who's choosing one approach over the other. But for me, I find that being real about my health journey and how I practice that resonates with me and resonates with the type of people I want to connect with.
Yeah, I agree. It's about authenticity. And I love that. Instead of like being sucked into fear, like let's just follow authenticity. And what's authentic to us is going to be different from what's authentic to other people. And also to remember that it's like what the microbiome makeup for one person might not be the right microbiome makeup for you. And so it does become individualized at some point. And to honor that and to celebrate that, I think is beautiful. It all comes back to diversity.
Exactly. And knowing that whatever you're doing is enough and being proud of that. And I think that proud feeling and reducing stress is going to be one of the best things for your health. So honestly, whatever is just not going to add to the stress plate is the healthiest thing. And for some people, if you're like, I'm taking a break from even worrying about this for a little bit, then you're already choosing to not be stressed. And that's a great choice to make as well.
I love that. To celebrate the things we're doing. That feels good. I'm going to celebrate the fact that I'm not worrying about that anymore. That feels like a good place to be. Well, Taylor, thank you so much. I'll be sure to link to your Substack newsletter and all of your information. But I want to close out with the last question that I ask all of my guests, and it has nothing to do with the microbiome, but maybe it does. I don't know, in some weird way, but it's
in my opinion,
everything connects. But this one, I don't want you to think about the microbiome. I want you to think about your own sense of pleasure. If it was your last meal on earth in this moment, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's such a good question. Okay. Oh, last meal. Okay. I have to be true to my roots and one of my first loves in life. And I think just the most delicious, fancy pizza. Yeah. There's pizza with like really nice melted mozzarella, figs, fresh basil, and so much cheesy goodness.
Yes.
Honestly, that's like such a good mixture of like, I love pizza and I know it's not great for you. And it's like such a basic sort of comfort food. And then you can also make it fancy and put tons of different stuff on top of it. And that's such a great representation of who I am. The base with a lot of fancy stuff on top of it.
I feel like I know you so much better just from that description. Thank you so much, Taylor. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nikki. And thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you so much for listening. If this work resonates with you in any way, you can support it by leaving a review or comment or sharing it with friends. Also, you can sign up for the newsletter, Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. And by becoming a paid member for just $5 a month, you help fund this entire project. Thank you so much to all of you who are already subscribed, especially to those paid subscribers. This work could not happen without you. I'm Nikki Sizemore, and as always, remember to nourish yourself with intention and love.